Lots of questions about, obviously, why it took a little longer to get the approval of AstraZeneca and how efficient a vaccine it is, because there had been questions around whether it works as well for people over 65. What did we hear from the regulator about that today?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Rosemary, because obviously this is good news today, but in some ways this is the most fraught, let's say, of the vaccine approvals, partially because of COVAX. We can talk about that in a minute, but also the questions that you're asking about and that our colleagues were asking regulators about the efficacy of the vaccine. Health Canada's own looking at the data provided by AstraZeneca says it's about 62% effective. So Canadians may hear that number and go, whoa, I'm quite sure the other ones were much higher. That doesn't sound great to me. Is this essentially sort of an inferior product? And that was certainly something Dr. Supriya Sharma from Health Canada tackled head on today. She said, listen, we don't do head-to-head trials of vaccines. It's not the way it works. But here's what you need to know. When they did these clinical trials with enormous sample sizes, right? We're talking hundreds of thousands of people. Nobody went to hospital. Nobody died because they had COVID. Nobody had an extreme adverse reaction to this vaccine, right? So when we're dealing with a world where we're talking about the possibility of variants, we're talking about the prospect of a third wave, obviously the thing we want first and foremost is to stop people from filling up our hospitals and losing their lives. And this vaccine is going to do that.
And in France, they have decided not to give it to people over 65, but the WHO has said, don't worry about it. We're comfortable giving it to people 65 and older and other people. I mean, it did sound, I'll get you to weigh in on that too, David, it did sound as though Health Canada is saying, if we've approved it, it's good and you should take it.
Yeah, there's sort of this fuss over good vaccine, bad vaccine. There's reports out of Germany where, Pfizer-BioNTech was developed, that people are kind of refusing the AstraZeneca because they see it as an inferior product. And Dr. Sharma did a very good job of walking us through that today. The flu vaccine we get is usually between, say, 54 and 64% effective. Would you not get your flu shot? Right now you have 0% effective protection. 62 is a whole lot better. And the thing is that 62% is to stop you from getting COVID at all. So there's a 38% chance, if you take this as hard, fast numbers, that you might get it, but a 0% chance, based on the data, that it will be serious enough to put you in the hospital, or that it will kill you, or that there is an adverse effect to the point that it's severely, there's an adverse effect to the vaccine that can hurt you. So she makes this point that it is safe. And, that is where we want to be. And if, for example, the 65 plus thing, there have been 2 large-scale clinical trials, 4 in total, 2 of them large-scale, is what Dr. Sharma says. And of the cohort of people in those clinical trials, about 9.7% of that population was 65 and up. They want a bigger number before they draw firm conclusions. So they're taking the clinical data, they're marrying it with the real world data, which, as we've seen with Pfizer and Moderna, you get new information the bigger the sample size is and the longer the period of time, and that then changes your assessment. So they believe it's safe for over 65. The effectiveness is the question. But the benefit now, this is where you see the benefit of the broad-based portfolio of vaccines. If the provinces decide that, based on the direction from Health Canada, that they don't want to use AstraZeneca for over 65, fine, use your Pfizer and Moderna for 65 plus, and then start using AstraZeneca for 65 and below. And as that supply comes in, you can do both sets of populations concurrently and get to a level of herd immunity and mass vaccination even faster. The other key point out of today, Rosie, Johnson & Johnson, the Janssen vaccine, that's very close. Dr. Sharma said it's in the final assessment. They have all the scientific data they need. They've looked at that. Now it's on the manufacturing assessment. That's the final step in green lighting a vaccine. It's like the house inspection, the final walkthrough when you're buying a house. Something can go wrong, but it's the final step. So we're very close, from her words today, of having another vaccine in the approval process as well.
And that of course is a one-dose vaccine. I mean, I think you would not want to get into a situation, and I think that's what Dr. Sharma was trying to prevent today, where you have Canadians saying, oh, I'd prefer this vaccine or this vaccine, right? Because we have such a diverse portfolio. I think, yes, as David said, provinces can maybe make some decisions about where they want it to go, but you wouldn't want people to say, I'm going to wait to get something else. In theory, if it's approved, you should, and you're offered it, you should take it because it will protect you to some extent. The AstraZeneca, too, Catherine, is a bit of a game changer in terms of, David alluded to the time between doses, but for other reasons, too.
Rosie, can you elaborate?
Yeah, just in terms of refrigeration. Yeah, like it doesn't require the deep freeze. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no. Well, and it's funny. I was thinking, at the beginning of this process when we were talking about the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, if we can all cast our minds back to December when we were in a period of such incredible enthusiasm about the fact that Canada, I think, third in the world to get some vaccines, but saying, well, listen, Pfizer, deep freeze, and of course, much like what David was talking about with some of the other data, we've learned a lot more since then about potentially adjusting some of that deep freeze stuff. But it does create challenges. So does Moderna. And so, yes, Johnson & Johnson as well, another option in terms of the freezing capacity that gives places a lot more flexibility. I mean, we're hearing here in Ontario today that even the long-term care workers are able to access the vaccine. In fact, about half of them in the province haven't, and part of that is getting them to the vaccine that's been the problem. So a real game changer here potentially.
Yeah, and that is sort of what all provinces are encountering when it comes to the cohort that they're trying to vaccinate right now, which for the vast majority of provinces is sort of 80 and over, and trying to get those people to the right places and get them the appointments, that becomes, it's doable for sure, but it is a little more challenging. So if you can transport a vaccine faster, if it only has to be one dose, if it only has to be kept in a fridge, all these things make the potential for, broad coverage, herd immunity, faster, I think, a real possibility. David, I'll get you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, Rosie, and another point just on the vaccine efficacy numbers. The standard they look for in most vaccines is 50%, right? So even at, say, 62% and above, you're in the flu vaccine sort of range of effectiveness and well above that threshold. And again, it is 100% protection against the more serious potential outcomes. But you talk about this now, and it can be stored between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, right? I mean, you can put AstraZeneca in a beer fridge. It's that kind of flexible vaccine compared to the other, more difficult ones of the minus 70 degree average. So you look at, I'll use my example of home of Newfoundland and Labrador. You can do Pfizer in St. John's, where you've got the big hospitals and in the larger population centers. But some of those communities on the south coast of the island that are only accessible by boat, or communities you can only get to on a ferry, you can bring the AstraZeneca in there, no problem. And you just need a nurse or a pharmacist or whatever, to anybody who can do an injection to get it done. Because this is the other thing. The rate limiting step on vaccination programs, other than supply, is the complexity of the supply that we have. They need to be done in specialized centers. And even when we move to mass vaccination, it's going to be in areas where you need a pharmacist to handle the product and these sorts of things. AstraZeneca and Janssen, if this happens next week or the week after, as the indications would be, that's when you can stand up your pharmacies, and that's when you can stand up family health clinics, because you can just send them the supply and they can just do it. And that is what really changes the pace and the acceleration and the coverage. So we've had this very dark 5-6 weeks on the vaccination story here in the country. You're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel as more and more bulbs pop on, thanks to the approval and delivery issues.
And beyond the numbers that David gave us off the top, Catherine, do we have a sense of how quickly some of this might start to come into the country, and how quickly we might be able to start getting it to provinces?
Well, this is the question, right? I mean, obviously, David had that new information for us about the 2 million doses. We are waiting for that 20 million. I think that's still some time to come. But then there's the possibility of accessing this supply through COVAX. And as I was saying, that's part of what makes this particular vaccine a little bit more politically fraught. On the one hand, this is how the COVAX system is supposed to work, right? Wealthy countries like Canada pay into it in order to make sure that less advantaged countries have access, but it does also secure a certain number of doses for Canada. At the same time, we see countries in places like Africa that are just starting to get their COVAX doses now that have had no vaccine. So the question of Canada drawing on this supply at the same time is certainly being criticized in some quarters of the world. We know our colleague Vashi Capellos yesterday on Power and Politics was interviewing the head of Gavi, and he was saying, listen, it's how the system works. Canada can access it, but clearly the way the system was set up was also most in mind for many, many countries in the world. As much as we've criticized Canada for continuing to sort of fall down that global ranking, there are a lot more countries way behind us that just haven't seen any vaccine yet at all.
Yeah, I have to say, I did an interview, maybe I'm not supposed to say because it was a pre-tape, but I did an interview with the chief of immunization for UNICEF, who is coordinating really getting those vaccines to parts of Africa. Another shipment went to Cote d'Ivoire today. And he was not He was not overly concerned that Canada had taken the vaccine from COVAX. He said, as you just said, Catherine, this is the way it works. So if they wanted to option it, they could. But he also said, and again, I'm scooping myself, but he also said that he's actually pretty happy with the pace that vaccines are getting to developing nations, that normally it takes much longer for vaccines to get to low and middle income countries. And he is surprised that it is moving as quickly as it is. So I don't know that will be the final conclusion on that, but it did sound encouraging that at least it is happening. At least the vaccine is getting there. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, certainly there's a multitude of perspectives on that. I remember interviewing a doctor in South Africa over the holidays when I was guest hosting The Current, who was telling just, really a chilling story about the community health center that she worked in, how they only had enough set up to give 5 people oxygen, and then a 6th person showed up suffering from COVID. And they were about to have to make this decision of, do they pull oxygen from somebody? What do they do about this other person? She was originally from the United States, but her perspective, and as I say, there are a multitude of perspectives on this, was just frankly outrage at countries. This wasn't specifically about COVAX, but looking at the wealthier countries in the world preparing to vaccinate their entire populations. She said, I see firsthand the need here and the idea that other people are going to get it first, essentially, because they have more money. I just wish they could see what I see and how much we're struggling. And certainly South Africa, I believe the worst hit on the African continent, and really struggling in very many ways. So even within our own borders, I mean, we know Jagmeet Singh, the NDP, have been very vocal on this. He was out today speaking with Stephen Lewis, being critical of the decision on Canada's part to access this system. Although, once again, we have to say, it is how the system is set up, and everyone has acknowledged that Canada is doing something that is well within its rights in terms of the arrangement.
Okay, we are standing by for the Prime Minister on this Friday. It will be, I guess, our first press conference with him, because on Tuesday, although he did make a dual press conference, there were no questions. He did that, of course, with the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Later today, the Prime Minister is also expected to attend another virtual meeting with his Foreign Affairs Minister, Marc Garneau, and the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to talk about a multitude of things. I did an interview with Antony Blinken yesterday that will air on my program Sunday. Oh, I'm doing a lot of self-promoting. It's very awkward. But I am going to play a little clip of something that the Secretary said about opening the border, because obviously it is not, but there are questions about when that would be possible. Here's the Secretary of State. We are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the border between Canada and the U.S. being shut down. Such an extraordinary move. I know in the conversations with the Prime Minister and the President this week, that was part of the roadmap, looking at the science that would allow us to open the border. What has to be in place, in your mind, before we can consider doing that?
Well, look, let's start with the fact that I think we've managed this remarkably well. We've kept the border going in the sense that we've had essential travel that has gone forward. We've made sure that the supply chains and trade could keep going despite the restrictions. And of course, we've both been focused on public health and public safety. So we're going to follow the science. We're going to follow the facts and make sure that together, as we all bounce back from COVID, we can get this going as quickly and as effectively and as deeply as possible.
But do you have the points that you want to see in order to get to that place? Does Canada have to be fully vaccinated? Are you looking at more rapid testing? What kinds of things are you considering in order to reach that place?
We have our experts looking at that. Of course, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, are in the lead, and we're going to follow their guidance.
So that's the Secretary of State talking about when potentially the Canada-U.S. border could reopen. It's because we're coming up on a year not only of the pandemic, but a year on that border being closed to non-essential travel. And David, in the roadmap that they presented earlier this week, it did seem to suggest that science would guide things. I was just trying to see if there was any other sort of points that they are looking for. It sounds like there are, but we weren't going to get into into the detail of them. I will obviously tell you that I also asked about vaccines and whether we could get any from them, frankly. But you'll have to wait to see that.
The answer is no. I'm going to guess. Yeah.
He's not. Don't send a van down, is what I would say.
So Doug Ford can't take his truck to Kalamazoo and come back with a load.
No.
Look, they have internal pressures just like Canada has internal pressures. And also, don't apologize for self-promotion when you got good stuff. But science is going to guide it. This was in the roadmap, but that was all it said, right? I mean, it was a commitment to science. I mean, one of the challenges with the Trump administration, as we all know, is that it was driven as much by personality and self-interest as it was science and national interest. And that is one of the challenges here. And I think one of the challenges, and I'm going to speculate here, Rosie, on their inability to say exactly what they're going to be looking for, is we don't know what the variants are going to do on either side of the border and in the populations. So it's hard to commit to a threshold of, say, of this rate of vaccination and this rate of this, because we don't know what the variants are going to do and how that's going to affect the vaccination, how it's going to affect the infection rates, how it's going to affect transmission rates or the fatality rates. So until there's clarity on that or control of that, it's going to be tough for them to say that sort of thing. But I think also that also sends out a signal that economic and political pressure is not going to drive them to opening the border on either side of it. That this is a public health decision. Yeah. This is not a trade decision. This is not you want to go to Florida decision. This is not any of those things. This is about what do you need to do to stop the spread and control this once in a century pandemic from even further disrupting things. I mean, it's amazing to think that we are a couple of weeks shy of a year when the Prime Minister told everyone to come home, and then they announced the mutual closing of the border to non-essential travel by land, and then we're still talking about this. But science is going to be the thing that guides the Biden administration in a way it did not drive the Trump administration, and that's likely very comforting to people who want to have a continental solution to this pandemic so that things can sort of get back to normal.
But before the Prime Minister comes out, I do want to touch on oh, he's out. Okay, he's coming. Because he will certainly be asked about the resignation or the stepping aside of the former Chief of the Defence Staff. So we'll expect that question as well. Here now, the Prime Minister of Canada.
I'm happy to be here virtually with Ministers Anand, Haidu and Leblanc, with Doctors Tam, New and Major General Fortin. Tomorrow, for many students in Quebec and in New Brunswick, it'll be the start of March break, and certainly they've deserved it. We know that things are not easy for young people and teachers, so take advantage of the break. The temperature is supposed to be good, not too cold. It's a good time to be outside and to be active, but it's extremely important to keep on being careful. Vaccinations are coming. Spring is on the way, and we cannot let this spring break ruin all the work we've done in the past few months. So follow local public health directives. Avoid gatherings. Now's not the time to get together with many families within the same home or chalet. And with the new variants, we can't take any risks. We want spring and summer to be better, so please be careful.
This week, Canada received a total of 643,000 doses of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. This is our largest week of shipments to date. Vaccines will keep arriving faster and faster as we head into the spring. And not just because shipments of Moderna and Pfizer are ramping up, which they are, but because Canada has now approved yet another vaccine option. This morning, Health Canada authorized the AstraZeneca Oxford COVID-19 vaccine, as well as the Serum Institute of India's version, Covishield, which is sponsored in Canada by Mississauga's Verity Pharmaceuticals. In other words, we now have a third safe and effective vaccine independently approved by health experts in Canada. This is very encouraging news. It means more people vaccinated and sooner. Because for AstraZeneca, like we were for Pfizer and Moderna, we're ready to get doses rolling. Canada has secured 2 million doses of the Covishield vaccine through an agreement with Verity Pharmaceuticals and the Serum Institute of India. With the vaccine now approved in Canada, our first shipment of 500,000 of these doses will arrive within weeks. The remaining doses are scheduled for delivery over the next couple of months. These 2 million doses are in addition to the 20 million doses we've already secured with AstraZeneca that will start arriving in the spring, and any AstraZeneca doses that Canada receives from COVAX will be added to that total. So there are a lot of numbers out there. Here's the bottom line. With Pfizer, Moderna, and now AstraZeneca, Canada will get to more than 6.5 million doses by the end of March. And there will be tens of millions more doses to come between April and June. I want to express my appreciation for the support and partnership of the Indian government in fighting COVID-19 and helping secure these doses for Canadians. I also want to thank Minister Anand and our teams at Public Services and Procurement Canada and Global Affairs Canada for their outstanding work on this file, both here and in India. Ce matin,
This morning, Health Canada authorized AstraZeneca's vaccine, which was developed in partnership with Oxford University, and that's very good news. Today, I can announce that Canada has signed an agreement with Verity Pharmaceuticals and the Serum Institute of India to receive 2 million doses of the Covishield vaccine, which is based on the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I can confirm that we will receive 500,000 doses under this agreement in the coming weeks, and the rest will arrive in the spring. These 2 million doses come on top of the 20 million doses we've already reserved with AstraZeneca and the other doses which Canada will receive through the COVAX initiative. So, in short, between now and the end of March, including Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, Canada will receive a total over 6.5 million doses of vaccines against COVID-19, and tens of millions of others will follow in April and June.
Vaccines are on everyone's mind right now. You're looking forward to you and your loved ones getting your shot. We're working around the clock to make sure that happens as soon as possible. Deliveries are ramping up. We've got incredible people right across the country working as one big team towards the same goal. Just take Brianna from Kamloops. Brianna is a frontline nurse who sent me an email recently, and I'm glad she did. Because to you, Brianna, and to all the nurses, doctors, and healthcare staff out there, I want to say this. Thank you. Every day, you're making sure that your fellow Canadians get tested, get vaccinated, and stay safe. You are our heroes. As vaccinations ramp up across the country, many provinces have expanded the number of health professions able to administer the COVID-19 vaccine. If you're a dentist, a paramedic, a midwife, a pharmacy technician, or a retired nurse, we need your help. And people like Brianna need your help too. Together, we will make sure that every Canadian who wants it will be vaccinated by September.
Now I'd like to continue with another piece of good news. Last June, a research and development company in Quebec, FP Innovations, which finds solutions for the forestry sector in Canada, set itself a goal, namely to develop a compostable face mask. And in partnership with Natural Resources Canada, they've now developed one of the first non-medical compostable face masks in the world. They are made by Canadian producers using Canadian wood fiber. Thank you so much to those involved for your leadership, and good luck with your next challenge, which is to develop a grade 1 medical mask, which is completely biodegradable. It's by continuing to work together and to use our know-how that together we will get through this crisis. And in fact, talking of working together, we've had a very productive and positive week with regard to our relationship with the United States.
An ambitious and comprehensive roadmap for renewing the partnership between Canada and the United States. And we got straight to work. On Tuesday, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, Minister Garneau, and I had a very productive meeting with President Biden and Vice President Harris. It was great to see that we're on the same page when it comes to so many of the challenges our world is facing, whether that's ending COVID-19 or rebuilding our economies in a way that supports the middle class and creates good jobs. We're on the same page, too, when it comes to fighting climate change and working together to build a more peaceful and prosperous world. Of course, our collaboration with the new administration didn't end with the meeting we had on Tuesday. On Wednesday, Minister Wilkinson had a meeting with Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. Yesterday, Minister Al-Khabra and Transportation Secretary Buttigieg released a joint statement on how our country's transportation sectors will tackle climate change together. And today, Minister Garneau and I will meet with Secretary of State Blinken to discuss defending human rights around the world, among other things. As partners, allies, and friends, I know we're going to work together to make life better for people on both sides of the border. And right now, job one remains beating this pandemic. We still have to be very careful, especially with new variants out there. We all want to start the spring in the best shape possible. That's why rapid testing continues to be an important part of our strategy to fight this virus. On that front, we're going to keep sending rapid tests to the provinces and territories while we also work with the private sector to get more Canadians tested. And finally, I want to end this morning by recognizing that today is the Lantern Festival, which marks the end of Lunar New Year. Just like with Black History Month, which ends this Sunday, celebrations were different this year. But what will never change is the fact that year-round Canada is stronger because of the incredible contributions of Asian Canadians, of Black Canadians, and of everyone who calls this country home. Now, more than ever, as we face these tough times, we need to come together and stand strong and united. Last week, the Vancouver Police Department released data that shows that anti-Asian crimes in the city rose by more than 700% in 2020. Too many other cities have also reported significant increases of these hateful crimes, including here in Ottawa. And in Edmonton, there's been a recent series of appalling attacks targeting Black, racialized, and Muslim women. To the victims, we stand with you. There is no place for this in Canada. These acts are unacceptable, and they have to stop.
These are difficult moments, but we have to keep on helping each other and working together now and in the future. Thank you to everyone. I will now give the floor to Minister Anand. Anita.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and good morning, everyone. We have seen a record number of COVID-19 vaccines coming into this country over the past week. And this will continue over the next weeks and months as we continue to see millions of vaccines coming into this country. We have continually said that when a vaccine is ready, Canada will be ready. And today's announcement that Health Canada has approved the AstraZeneca vaccine is testament to our strategy of diversification. In other words, we pursued advanced purchase agreements with 7 leading vaccine manufacturers to place Canadians in the best stead possible. Once a vaccine was approved by Health Canada, we wanted to make sure that every Canadian had access to a vaccine. And our strategy of diversification continues to see results. As the Prime Minister just announced, Canada has secured 2 million doses of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine through an agreement with Verity Pharmaceuticals and the Serum Institute of India, in collaboration with AstraZeneca Canada. Following this morning's announcement that the vaccine has been approved by Health Canada, I am pleased to confirm that the first batch of doses, consisting of 500,000 doses, will be delivered to Canada in the coming days, and they will then be distributed to the provinces and territories. The remaining 1.5 million doses are expected to arrive in the coming months.
I am pleased to confirm, following approval by Health Canada this morning, that the 500,000 100,000 first doses of AstraZeneca will arrive in the coming days and will be quickly ready to be administered by the provinces and territories, and the remaining 1.5 million doses should arrive within the scheduled deadline in the course of the spring.
Are in addition to the 20 million doses already secured through an earlier agreement with AstraZeneca. We expect to start receiving those doses in the second quarter, and today's Health Canada regulatory approval will allow us now to firm up the delivery schedule, which we will share with you as soon as it is confirmed. Avec les annonces d'aujourd'hui,
with today's announcements, I would like to reaffirm that we will be able to provide, by the end of September, a vaccine to every Canadian for whom it is recommended to receive a vaccine against COVID-19.
Continue to leave no stone unturned to bring as many vaccines as possible into Canada as quickly as possible. We know that with the rollout of vaccines, the ongoing use of rapid tests, and following public health measures, we can combat this virus once and for all. Today's announcement that AstraZeneca vaccines will be arriving now that they have been approved by Health Canada is good news for Canadians. Thank you. Merci, Miigwech.
Minister Aidu.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Prime Minister and team, for great news today. And of course, this means we now have 3 approved vaccines in Canada: Pfizer, Moderna, and now AstraZeneca. And a new vaccine means there are more options for Canadians. And obviously, this is exciting news for all Canadians who are waiting their turn to get vaccinated. I will also say that while we wait our turn, it's important to remember that we do need to continue to protect ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities. So that means the things that we've been doing for so long: washing our hands, staying physically distanced, staying home when we're sick, reaching out for a test, even if we're slightly worried about our condition, slight fever, a slight cough, call public health. Please ask to get tested. Make sure that we know that we're protecting our families and our communities. I also want to thank all of the travelers who are complying with our new border and quarantine measures. Of course, these measures are in place to protect Canadians against variants of concern. It allows for our country to be able to analyze the virus as it enters our country, as it shifts and changes. We are at a critical time in our fight with COVID-19. As we see new vaccines arrive, we want nothing to stop our progress. And so I want to thank Canadians who are complying with the quarantine measures, complying with the border screening measures. This will help protect our communities and will help us in our fight against COVID-19. These times are stressful. I know that. I know many people are worried. Despite the good news today, there continues to be anxiety in communities that are seeing cases rise. Please don't forget about taking care of yourself, your mental health, the mental health of your close ones. And I remind everyone about wellnesstogether.ca, a free resource that is open to all Canadians in both official languages with translation into 60 others. Don't hesitate to check out this resource online for support if you're needing it. It's a sign of strength to reach out for help, and I want to thank all Canadians in their resiliency and their strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tam.
Hi, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning to everyone.
Good morning. 58,217 cases of COVID-19 in Canada, including 21,865 deaths. Currently, there are 30,335 active cases across Canada. Over the past week, an average of 97,120 tests were completed daily, of which 3.2% were positive for COVID-19, and an average of 2,960 new cases and 52 deaths were reported daily. During the same period of time, 2,269 people with COVID-19 were being treated in their hospitals each day, including 564 in critical care. Although COVID-19 activity has been declining nationally for several weeks, we are keeping a close eye on increased case counts over the past few days. In particular, average daily case counts have increased, ranging from 8 to 14% higher in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta, as compared to last week. In addition, the number of cases involving the more contagious B.1.1.7 variant of concern continues to increase, with the highest numbers to date being reported from these same three provinces. To date, there have been 964 B.1.1.7, 44 B.1.351, and 2 P.1 variant cases reported across Canada. With daily case counts still elevated, almost 75 times higher than the peak of the first wave, and more contagious variants spreading, the risk of rapid reacceleration remains. At the same time, new variants continue to emerge, and those with an advantage, such as the ability to spread faster, can become predominant. Given a much narrower margin of error with these variants, controlling the epidemic will be much more difficult. This is why we must do our best to prevent spread now and avoid more illnesses and loss that would follow. I know we're all tired, but we are getting closer every day. Considering how far we have come, let's keep working together to achieve the successful outcome we've already worked so hard for. Our progress on the vaccine front continues to give us reason for optimism. To date, over 1.7 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered across Canada, and there are early indications of high vaccine efficacy, high vaccine effectiveness among some other populations at the highest risk of severe outcomes or exposure, who are being targeted by priority vaccination programs. As vaccine programs continue to roll out, federal, provincial, and territorial authorities are continuing to monitor vaccine safety. To date, as of February the 19th, there have been 1,235 reports of adverse events following immunization. These reports include any medical event that occurs following immunization, but is not necessarily related to the vaccine or the immunization process. A total of 167 of these reports to date, about 1 in 9,000 doses administered, were considered serious, such as severe allergic reactions. All adverse events are subject to review, and all serious events undergo a detailed investigation to determine whether or not they are related to the use of the vaccine. To date, no unexpected vaccine safety issues have been identified. As we continue to make progress, I urge Canadians to remain vigilant, continue to follow local public health advice, and consistently maintain individual practices that keep us and our families safer. We are stronger together, and together we are achieving great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello to everyone. To date, there have been 858,217 cases of COVID in Canada, including 21,865 deaths. Currently, there are 30,335 active cases across Canada. Over the past week, an average of 97,120 tests were completed daily, of which 3.2% were positive for COVID-19, and an average of 2,960 new cases and 52 deaths were reported daily. During the same period, 2,269 people with COVID-19 were being treated in our hospitals each day, including 564 in critical care. Although COVID-19 activity has been declining nationally for several weeks, we're keeping a close eye on increased case counts over the past few days. In particular, average daily counts have increased, ranging from 8 to 14% higher in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta as compared to last week. In addition, the number of cases involving the more contagious B.1.1.7 variant of concern continues to increase, with the highest numbers to date being reported from these same three provinces. To date, there have been 964 B.1.1.7, 44 B.1.351, and 2 P.1 variant cases reported across Canada. With daily counts still elevated, almost 75% higher than the peak of the first wave, and more contagious variants spreading, the risk of rapid re-acceleration remains. At the same time, new variants continue to emerge, and those with an advantage, such as the ability to spread faster, can become predominant. Given a much narrower margin of error with these variants, controlling the epidemic would become much more difficult, and this is why we must do our best to prevent spread now and avoid more illness and loss that could follow. I know we're all tired, but we're getting closer every day. Considering how far we've come, let's keep working together to achieve the successful outcome that we've already worked so hard for. Our progress on the vaccine front continues to give us reason for optimism. To date, over 1.7 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered across Canada, and there are early indications of high vaccine effectiveness among some of the populations at highest risk of severe outcomes or exposure who are being targeted by priority vaccination programs. As vaccine programs continue to roll out, federal, provincial, and territorial authorities are continuing to monitor vaccine safety. To date, as of February 19th, there have been 1,235 reports of adverse events following immunization, and these reports include any medical event that occurs following immunization, but not necessarily related to the vaccine or the immunization process. A total of 167 of these reports to date, about 1 in 9,000 doses administered, were considered serious, such as, for instance, a severe allergic reaction. All adverse events are subject to review, and all serious events undergo a detailed investigation to determine whether or not they are related to the use of the vaccine. To date, no unexpected vaccine safety issues have been identified. As we continue to make progress, I urge Canadians to remain vigilant, to continue to follow local public health advice, and consistently maintain individual practices that keeps us and our families safe. We're stronger together, and together we are achieving great things. Thank you.
Merci, Dr. New. Le Premier ministre répondra à des questions.
Thank you, Dr. New. The Prime Minister will take questions for 20 minutes. Doctors, ministers, and Major General Fortin will be here to answer your questions.
Questions for 20 minutes. Ministers, doctors, and Major General Fortin will remain available to answer more questions afterward. Starting with the phone today, one question, one follow-up. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Catherine Lévesque.
First question. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. We've received numbers which show that Quebec has millions of rapid tests which will expire in April. Only a small fraction of those rapid tests have been given to schools or companies who have asked for them. What do you think of that situation? And will the federal government send more rapid tests to Quebec if they might be wasted? Answer, we're still working with the provinces and territories on the administration of rapid tests. We know that it'll be very important to use those tests in light of the new variants in order to keep Canadians safe. as lockdowns slowly come down. At the same time, we are working with the private sector to make sure that other options are out there for use of these rapid tests. We know that the rapid tests are a way to help keep us safe as spring comes closer. Dominique, is there anything you'd like to add on the work you've done with the provinces on rapid testing? Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You're right. In the course of our discussions every 2 weeks, we did talk about the issue, and I know Minister Hajdu is speaking with her counterparts. Some governments have asked for more of these rapid tests, and some companies in certain sectors of the economy want to use more of them as well. So we are giving these tests to the provinces so they can use them. Follow-up question, Catherine? Yes. I'd like to come back to the vaccines. Many Canadians this week were enviously looking towards Great Britain, which was announcing the potential end of lockdowns and coming back to normal life. With the approval of AstraZeneca and other vaccines soon, do you think Canada could go back to normal life before the end of September? Answer. Well, we certainly hope to end the lockdowns and come back to normal life as quickly as possible, and that's why we are working every day to get more vaccines more quickly for Canadians. In light of today's good news, we will receive 6.5 million doses by the end of March and tens of millions of additional doses in April, May, and June. So we know that we've got the situation in hand, and the mass vaccination will roll out in the coming weeks and months. But when it comes to public health directives, several factors will have to be taken into account, including the rate of vaccination and the presence of these variants and outbreaks in certain areas, the percentages of people who are vulnerable. But Health Canada is keeping a close eye on the situation, so perhaps I can turn to Dr. Tam or Dr. New for additional information on when we can start loosening the lockdowns.
Obviously, we all want to get back to a semblance of normality as quickly as possible. And that's why, as a government, we're working every single day to get more vaccines more quickly into the arms of Canadians. And it's good news that we have today that we can announce 6.5 million doses to be arriving by the end of next month, by the end of March, and tens of millions of doses scheduled to arrive at the very least in April, May, and June. So we're well on our way, but what actually that's going to mean in terms of loosening of public health rules will depend on many factors, including vaccination rates, but also the presence of variants, of a third wave, issues like that. And with that, I'm happy to turn to Drs. Tam or New for comments on what we're looking at in terms of what those recommendations could be. Teresa?
Dr. Tam?
The reception just getting a little bit slower on my end. But I actually would just echo what the Prime Minister has said. And that, of course, we would all want to get to a spot where there's less of those more restrictive measures. There are a number of ways to do that.
Teresa, your sound is really not coming through well. Perhaps we can see if Howard's sound is better.
And secondly, may I just check to see if my line is still okay?
Yeah. Yes, it's a Dr. New. I'll answer in English and maybe also in French. Certainly, not much to add to the Prime Minister's answer. I think it was very complete. The fact is that certainly with the introduction of another vaccine to our portfolio of vaccines, that's very important. But there are other factors to consider as well, the emergence of variants. And of course, with our public health measures, I don't think we can just rely on the vaccines alone to be the silver bullet. People need to understand that we need to keep the public health measures in place with respect to at least personal behaviors. I think that's very important that people recognize that we need to keep at it in terms of practicing good personal behaviors. Certainly, the public health measures at a population level. There is, I think, obviously in the different provinces and territories, a starting of loosening, but I think that has to be tied very closely to a good surveillance, watching what the situation is, looking at the indicators, and certainly if there's any indication that the case rates and certainly the emergence of variants are increasing, that we would need to adjust as appropriate. But the vaccinations, and I think certainly the introduction of vaccines and more vaccines coming to Canada is very, very good news. Je sais pas ce que je dois répéter en français, ça marche, je pense.
Oui, bonne idée. Rapidement en français.
I will repeat that answer in French. I think that vaccines are very important, of course, but we just cannot let our guard down when it comes to public health measures and personal behaviors. With March break in Quebec, it's really important to keep on engaging in good individual public health practices. Vaccinations are not a silver bullet. And with the arrival of these new variants, well, that's a concern. We're keeping a close eye on them. But there's no doubt we have to keep on practicing good individual behavior. However, today there's a lot of good news with the approval of the third vaccine in Canada.
Back to the phone. Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Ryan Tumulty, The National Post. Line open.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. I'm wondering with the AstraZeneca vaccine, I understand a big majority of our shipment, the 20 million shipment, is coming from the U.S. Did you get some assurances from President Biden that he won't interfere with that shipment in any way?
So far, all of our indications are that those vaccine doses are going to be arriving in Canada as scheduled during the second quarter. But for more specifics, I'm happy to turn to Minister Anand to talk about the AstraZeneca order of 20 million doses. Anita.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Yes, the Prime Minister is exactly right that we are receiving positive indications that we will be on track to receive our 20 million doses from the facility in the United States. Those are the 20 million doses that we have under our bilateral arrangement with AstraZeneca arriving in Q2 and Q3. And in addition, as announced today, we wanted to make sure that Canadians had access to AstraZeneca vaccines as soon as possible. And as a result, we have been negotiating with the Serum Institute of India since August 2020, and those negotiations came to fruition, finalized yesterday, so that we can ensure that the AstraZeneca vaccine being produced by the Serum Institute of India will be arriving in the coming days and weeks. Thanks, Ryan.
Following up, Ryan?
Yeah, sir. You were asked before about returning to normal. From what we've read and what the experts have said, getting most seniors vaccinated should reduce the number of deaths and dramatically reduce the number of hospitalizations. Is that enough in your mind to start returning Canadian society to normal, to start seeing more openings and getting businesses back to normal?
Like you, Ryan, like millions of Canadians and people all around the world, I am reading all sorts of different reports by different experts on, what could happen, what might happen. If you hit this, you could do that. If you do this, we can do that. There are an awful lot of extraordinary experts around the world, giving helpful advice on what next steps we can take and how we take them. Here in Canada, we rely on people like Dr. Tam and the experts and the vaccine task force and the immunity task force. We will continue to follow the best expert advice in terms of what we can do to reopen and get back to normal as quickly as possible without compromising the safety of Canadians.
Thank you. Operator, last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. My first question is on this vaccination passport. Yesterday, the Minister of Health of Quebec said that Quebec is preparing to go with a health passport, which will help loosen the lockdown. I'm just wondering where your thoughts are at on a vaccination passport. I think it's something people have been talking about for a while now. I think it's important to follow recommendations from experts at every stage. There might be negative consequences if you want benefits but don't have this health passport, but we're going to follow public health advice.
Vaccine immunity passports, such is one that has been talked about for a while. There are potential pros and cons that I've heard on various issues surrounding it. Our position as a government is always going to be to rely on the best advice of experts in terms of how we can move forward in ways that both encourage a return to normalcy as much as possible, as quickly as possible, while not putting at risk Canadians' health or other elements in our community. So we'll continue to pay close attention to the recommendations that our experts make in terms of measures like that.
Ensuite, question, Marie?
Follow-up question. With all due respect, that's a fairly vague answer. When we recently asked that question last winter, you rejected the idea of a vaccine passport. You did not support it then. So am I to understand that you are now open to the idea and that it is something under study right now? Next question. What can you tell us about the effectiveness of the AstraZeneca vaccine against the new variants? Some people fear in certain countries that this vaccine is not effective against those variants. What do you say to that? Answer. Well, from the very outset, Marie, we've seen that experts' recommendations evolve and the data evolves. And so we have to keep on listening to public health experts, which is what we are doing. We are following their best advice, regardless of what they are advising us on. With regard to the effectiveness of the AstraZeneca vaccine, I'm happy to let one of our experts take that question, one of our two doctors, or perhaps Minister Haidu or Minister Anand.
Okay, say Dr. New that.
Go ahead.
Dr. New here. I believe that with the onboarding of the AstraZeneca vaccine, it gives us another tool to use, and it's another tool in our toolbox. And following the approval of Health Canada, the efficacy of this vaccine stands at 62%, but we have to look at the entire profile of each vaccine. Because vaccines, or rather this vaccine here, the AstraZeneca, is easier to administer than Pfizer and Moderna. So this is something we need to take into account. What was your other question? I apologize, I've forgotten what that was. It was with regard to the new variants. Again, we are keeping an eye on the new variants and how other countries are dealing with them. As far as I understand, some companies such as Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca are doing experiments in their laboratories to assess the efficacy of their vaccines and to see if these will need to be tweaked in order to fight the new variants. So this is something that's happening right now, and we are keeping an eye on what is happening around the world with regard to the new variants. But as far as our experience is concerned here in Canada, we've had very good results so far with the efficacy of the vaccines. We've approved in the groups we have given the vaccines to, for instance, the elderly and long-term care homes.
We'll now take questions in the room.
Good afternoon, Mayor Abson from the Canadian Press. Just wondering, in your conversation with the U.S. President this week, or following that, what exactly do you think the United States can do to help secure freedom for Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig?
As we said from the very beginning, this is an issue that is a top priority for us as a country to secure the release of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. The United States obviously has a significant role to play, and we will continue to work with them. But because these are processes that are ongoing, I won't comment on the details of it other than, as I've said, to reiterate that the United States is taking their role in this very seriously, and we look forward to working with them on bringing the two Michaels home as soon as possible.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, the allegations against Art McDonald are apparently serious enough that he stepped aside as CDS. Wondering, when you appointed him, announced his appointment before Christmas, did you know about any of these allegations? And if you didn't, do you now know about them? And why do you think you weren't informed about them earlier before you selected him?
Let me begin, Glenn, by reiterating that every single person in this country deserves a safe place to work in, free from harassment or intimidation. This is something that is extremely important, and it's something we've taken strides on, both in our government and in the military, but there's always more to do. One of the most important things is that processes be followed every step of the way, and because there is an ongoing review into this situation and we're ensuring that all the steps are properly taken, I won't be commenting specifically on this process at this time, other than to say that the following of all the steps in this to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard and that people understand how seriously we take all these concerns and issues is important. Okay. Je pense que c'est important de souligner d'abord que
I think it's important to point out that no one should be at work and not feel safe, whether they are victims of harassment or intimidation. And that's why we have put in place serious measures as a government and within the armed forces to follow up. Every time, regardless of where it happens, there are allegations that are raised or concerns that are raised. We follow up with due diligence to make sure that everyone has the chance to be heard, because that is a particular situation which is under investigation. I will not comment on the details of that process, except to say that we are making sure that every step is being followed to the letter.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. My inbox is full of emails from women who have experienced sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces under your government's watch. And today you're telling us that everyone has the right to a safe workplace, that you're committed to that. But you extended the term of a Chief of Defence Staff who is accused of sexual misconduct and under police investigation. You personally appointed another Chief of Defence Staff who had to step down 6 weeks later due to this. And the only answers we're getting in terms of accountability is that an email was sent to the Privy Council office and that you're committed. What do you say to these women who are wondering whether you're actually serious about this and what steps you're going to take, because they're feeling like they're losing trust in the chain of command, that this is systemic at the highest levels of the military, and that your government is not taking action?
I think what we've seen with the current Chief of Defence Staff choosing to step aside because of these allegations demonstrates that the military and that the government takes extremely seriously any allegations of the sort. We have done that. I have personally done that as leader from the very beginning, and we will continue to ensure that everyone who works in the government or in the military or anywhere across the country is heard when they come forward with challenges or allegations or concerns. We have a lot of work to do in our systems, in our workplaces across the country to continue to move forward on making sure that they are safe and free from intimidation and harassment and sexual assault. We have made great strides as a country over the past years, over the past decade, but there is an awful lot more to do. And I think if we can highlight, as we have, that no one is out of reach of concerns and allegations like this, that they will always be taken seriously. And I want to say to anyone who has survived incidents or issues of sexual assault that we will be there to listen, to hear them, to work with them, and to move forward through processes that will get to the right answers.
Français, s'il vous plaît.
Je pense que ce qu'on a vu au cours des
I believe that what we have seen in the past weeks and what we're hearing now underscores the point that every person who works in this country, who works for the government or the armed forces, has a right to work in a safe environment free of intimidation or harassment. We are always going to take that seriousness, and I think we've shown. And what the Chief of Defense Staff has shown when he chose to step aside from his position as the investigation unfolds is that no one is protected against allegations, and these allegations will be taken seriously. We will make sure that every time a person comes forward with concerns or stories, that the matter be addressed and that we follow a rigorous process in a responsible manner, that the person making the allegations be heard and supported, and that at the same time we work even harder to change our systems and our institutions in order to end these stories, which are always concerning.
Prime Minister, just to follow up on that, your government was made aware of these allegations in 2018, 3 years ago. 3 years ago that your government had something you could have done about this. There was no further inquiries made by the defense minister. He apparently didn't tell you based on what we're hearing in question period. You're saying you learned about this from media reports. Isn't there a responsibility in your government to take political action when this kind of an allegation is brought forward? Are you satisfied with how the minister handled this? Because you're saying, you know, you've always taken the appropriate actions, but this was an email and that was it.
There are processes in place that we have put in place, that we have strengthened, that we expect will be followed in every single situation. Every case is different, and the processes are rigorous. And that's why there is a review going on right now to make sure that indeed all the appropriate steps were followed, so that we can ensure that there is accountability if the appropriate steps weren't followed, and to make sure as well that the systems we have in place are adequate, are the right ones. If all the steps were followed and it shows that the system isn't strong enough, well, we will strengthen that system. We know that these problems have been going on for many years in many systems and institutions, and we need to change them. We have taken significant steps, but as has been highlighted, there's always more to do, and we will continue to do more to support survivors, to support people who come forward.
Merci. Prochaine question dans la salle.
Next question from the room. With AstraZeneca, which is effective only up to 62%, and the other vaccines' efficacy at 81%, the ones that have already been approved, are you afraid that Canadians will begin vaccine shopping, or whether they'll refuse to take AstraZeneca, as has happened in other countries? Answer. First of all, it's good news that we have access to several vaccines, and our expert panel, which advises on how and where to use these vaccines, will keep on doing its work and will present more options with regard to these different types of vaccines. So that's great news. And we know that being vaccinated by a vaccine certified by Health Canada is always better than not getting a vaccine. And we hope that we will be getting vaccines into the arms of as many Canadians as possible, as quickly as possible, because as soon as enough Canadians have been vaccinated, regardless of which vaccine is used, we will be able to go back to life as normal.
Prime Minister Tom Perry from CBC. I'd like to go back to this week's vote on declaring the genocide in China. Why did you and your cabinet decide to sit out that vote? Also, I'd like to ask you on the definition of genocide. You've said you want to dot the I's, cross the T's before you say whether China's committing genocide. But when the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report came out, you accepted its findings that Canada was committing genocide. So why are you ready to accept that Canada is committing genocide and not China?
On your first question, Tom, I think it's really important that parliamentarians can speak out and can highlight concerns that they have and concerns that they've heard and represent the voices of their constituents. And that's why it was important that, that Parliament was able to have a vote on this. But a government has a responsibility that goes beyond a legislative assembly, and we need to make sure that we are moving forward appropriately and actually following up with the kinds of actions that are going to put an end to human rights abuses. And that means working with our allies. That means, as I did last Friday, bringing it up with the G7 and having a discussion about how we can move forward in a concerted fashion to make determinations and to ensure the appropriate international bodies weigh in, and then to move forward on sanctions and consequences in a coordinated way. That's the responsibility that a government has, and that's one that we take very, very seriously. In regards to the question of the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, we had an expert panel that we commissioned, an inquiry, that national public inquiry that we had long promised, that we delivered on over the past years, that looked into this situation, that heard from testimony from thousands of Canadians, of families, really dug into the issue with full access across the country to what was going on and came to a determination. And that's very much what we want to see in the international community. We want to see investigative bodies able to look into this and make a determination, because it is not a situation to be taken lightly. We have, for the past many years, been highlighting our real and deep concerns about the human rights situation in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs and with the treatment of ethnic minorities in China, including directly to the Chinese government. And we will continue to highlight those concerns while we work with the international community on charting the right path forward.
Thank you, Prime Minister. C'est tout le temps que vous avez avec nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Prime Minister. That's all the time you have with us here today. I think that, first of all, it's important for a legislative assembly that MPs be able to speak about such a serious issue as the Uyghur situation. It's extremely important for Parliament to be able to express itself on that issue. But as a government, we have additional responsibilities to act, to coordinate with our allies, to ensure that measures and relationships and responses be found in the right way with the international community. And that is why I continue to speak. I spoke with our G7 colleagues last Friday in order to work together to coordinate both our issues, our questions, and our responses to emerging issues and existing issues that we need to move forward on. With respect to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the inquiry that we launched in 2015 had been sought for, that lasted for years, that went across the country, that looked at all the necessary facts to draw their conclusions to see how we could bring this situation to an end and recognize the victims and their families. It's something that we want to see in Xinjiang. We need reports, investigations, independent investigators to determine what it is that's going on and what are the next steps, what the next steps are that must be taken. And we take our responsibility extremely seriously when it comes to emphasizing human rights, even directly with the Chinese government And we will continue to be firm in our convictions that we need to find answers and find the necessary measures and actions to bring these abuses to an end. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Wrap up
we will now take some
here
questions
of
on
Minister's
the
press
phone.
conference. We will continue our coverage of the ministers answering questions about AstraZeneca. Just wanted to highlight, though, that was the first time the Prime Minister has commented since the recent Chief of the Defence Staff, former Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Art MacDonald, stepped away from his post following allegations of sexual misconduct. That has been a problem that has been an issue inside the military for years now. The Prime Minister refused to offer any further details because it is being investigated. Our team will pick up our coverage of all of this as we continue to listen to the press conference. I'm Rosemary Barton. You can continue watching right now.
Hi, Marika. Thanks for your question. I'm going to start and then I'm going to hand it over to Minister Hajdu. My role is solely to procure vaccines, and that's exactly what I am doing with my team at PSPC. We are making sure that we have early access to vaccines. So, for example, this transaction with the Serum Institute of India today is one example of the way in which we are ensuring the earliest possible access to approved vaccines, with 500,000 doses coming in the next days and weeks, and then 1.5 million doses of that vaccine coming over the next months, and in total 22 million of the AstraZeneca vaccine in total, combined with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines as being approved vaccines. So you're correct that the numbers that we are seeing and plan to see of approved vaccines are increasing as a result of the AstraZeneca approval today and the transaction with the Serum Institute. And in particular, we're going to see 23 million of Pfizer and Moderna in Q2 and Q3, 20 million of AstraZeneca in Q2 and Q3, 2 million of the Serum AstraZeneca doses, and 1.9 million of the COVAX doses. So in total, that's 107.9 million approved doses. In terms of the timelines, that you refer to in your question, that would be something that I will ask Minister Hajdu to comment on, given her role with the Public Health Agency of Canada in the distributions. But by all means, we are moving up doses and deliveries of doses with the end in mind of accelerating timelines. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anita, and thanks, Marika, for the question. I'll just say, obviously, earlier doses arriving earlier than we expected and in greater volume is a good news story, and it possibly could accelerate sort of our targets and our goals. But of course, we've seen that there can be bumps in the road, and things can happen on the manufacturing side. There can be challenges along the way. So I think we have realistic targets. Of course, if we achieve our goal of every Canadian having access to immunization, to vaccination earlier than the end of September, that's good news. And certainly we are working on that. But I just want Canadians to know that there are things beyond our control, such as the bumps that we saw with Pfizer and Moderna earlier in the month, where, unexpected challenges on the manufacturing side can arise. There can be a number of other challenges from an export perspective. And so, we obviously know that it's important that we remain aggressive in getting as many doses as soon as possible. And that's exactly what Minister Nanda and her team are doing. But also being realistic that there are sometimes situations that we can't control.
Following up, Marika?
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Anand, the last update from your office on the cost of the vaccine was released in the fall. At that point, the number released was over $1 billion. Since January, your office has been telling me that an updated number or estimate of the cost so far would be released. Can you give us that update? How much total has the government now spent on vaccines?
If she has anything to add again. We are continuing to make sure that we have the most accurate number possible before providing that to the Canadian public. And as I said, there are a number of transactions that are currently ongoing or have just occurred, including the exercise of options and now this transaction with the Serum Institute. So we want to make sure that that number is accurate. And we are working with the Public Health Agency of Canada, that is the body for which we are procuring these vaccines prior to distribution to the provinces and territories. And in that vein, I will ask Minister Hajdu if she has anything else to add.
Well, not particularly, other than to say that the cost of not vaccinating as urgently as possible is significant. And so our focus has always been on getting vaccines to Canada as soon as possible. That's what Canadians expect. And as I think Dr. New and many others have pointed out, that is one of the most powerful tools in our toolbox to restoring the functioning of our communities and our economy.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question au téléphone.
Thank you. Operator, next question on the telephone.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question. Hélène Buzetti.
Next question. Hélène Buzetti, Co-op Information.
I'd like more clarification about the delivery schedule, just to keep numbers as we've seen them. We know that we were supposed to receive 6 million doses of Moderna and Pfizer by the end of March, and 10.8 million extra doses between April and June. So can you tell us, for those two time frames, how many extra doses we will be getting?
Thank you so much. So you're right to point to 6 million doses of Pfizer and Moderna in Q1. And with the Serum Institute transaction of the AstraZeneca doses, that number increases to 6.5 million doses for Q1. In the following quarters of Q2 and Q3, we are going to see 23 million doses of Pfizer and Moderna, 20 million doses of AstraZeneca, 2 million doses of the Serum Institute, 1.9 million doses of COVAX. And I'm grouping all of those into Q2 and Q3 because our delivery schedule with AstraZeneca is currently being finalized now that we have Health Canada approval. So we are continuing to make sure that we have all of the deliveries in terms of the quarters in which they are arriving ascertained before we provide the specific week-to-week schedules. And we will provide that to the Public Health Agency, the provinces and territories, as soon as we have that.
Yeah, so my question was specifically regarding Q2. So what you're saying right now is you don't know if any of those millions of doses will actually arrive during Q2.
Actually, I do know. What I'm going to tell you, break it down in terms of Q2 alone. We are going to see 1.5 million doses of AstraZeneca from the Serum Institute arriving in Q2. We are going to see 23 million doses of Pfizer and Moderna arriving in Q2. We are going to be seeing doses of AstraZeneca arriving in Q2 and Q3. And those are the numbers that I'm ascertaining now under our bilateral APA in terms of the delivery schedule. And I will provide those to you as soon as we have that delivery schedule finalized. Does that answer your question or not?
Well, yeah, but you mentioned 23 million for Pfizer and Moderna, and I thought it was 10.8 million. So now I'm all mixed up. Just for Q2.
Why don't I get those numbers to you directly, and we can have another conversation after this press conference.
Thank you. Merci, Madame la Ministre. On m'avertit que
Thank you, Madam Minister. I'm told that Major General Fortin has to leave, so we're going to continue with one last question by telephone. Operator? Thank you. Next question. La Presse. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I do. I just want to get an update on the obligatory, mandatory hotel quarantine. Prime Minister and yourself admitted that there were problems, and you committed to adjusting some of those problems. Have there been adjustments made to the program?
Thank you, Melanie. And yes, indeed, we've been adding capacity on the phone lines and refining our processes to make sure that things are moving smoothly. I will thank the Canadians and travelers that are complying with our border measures. The majority of them are, and I'll remind Canadians that this is not an option, that they must comply with the border measures when they return to Canada for the safety of themselves, their families, and of course, the country.
Okay, let me just be more specific, because I did ask those specific questions to the department and didn't get any answers. What about the idea of coming up with a website, since it's 2021? And is there some kind of surveillance from the public health agency in the hotels that were chosen? Are there agents that are going there to do spot checks and make sure everybody complies with the public health rules?
Well, thank you, Melanie. First of all, the hotels that were chosen based on their ability to indicate that they could provide the level of services expected by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and that they had the processes in place to do so. And we continue to monitor that. And travelers are also given a direct line to the Public Health Agency of Canada to call if they're having any challenges in the hotel system, as well as lines that the hotels have themselves. In terms of processes, as I said, we continue to review the processes from the testing perspective, but also from the mandatory to quarantine perspective, and add capacity. We have now a virtual assistant that can assist people when they are calling to inquire about hotel bookings. We do have web capacity coming, and we have added additional agents to help people that are booking hotels.
Thank you. We will now turn back to the room for more questions.
Hi, Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. Minister Hajdu, I think this might be for you, but anyone can tackle it. The Prime Minister mentioned in his remarks today that we're calling on paramedics and all sorts of other health professionals to step up and volunteer to give injections. Are we concerned that we do not have enough people to give the vaccinations that we're getting, or is that just sort of what's already been happening?
I'll speak first, and then I think I'll turn to Dr. Tam, who's apparently back online and communicating with the medical officers of health across the country. We know that our healthcare providers across the country have been working day and night to protect people from COVID-19. They're exhausted, and they have been doing an exemplary, heroic job on behalf of all of us. Of course, we at the Public Health Agency of Canada stand by, ready to assist provinces and territories in a variety of different ways, including outbreak prevention, supports in long-term care, epidemiological support, and looking at how we can actually accelerate and support process around immunization. I think what the Prime Minister is referring to is that I think many healthcare professionals want to be part of this process. And I know provinces and territories are in the stages of planning about how they will use their full suite of professionals, including pharmacies, by the way, who are always part of immunization with influenza. And as we get more and more traditional vaccines that don't require the same kinds of storage and transportation requirements that Pfizer and Moderna do, as we receive these more traditional vaccines, it opens up a space for the vaccine to be transported more easily, to be administered more easily in some more traditional routes. And the objective, of course, is to get vaccinations out to as many Canadians as quickly as they arrive. So maybe I'll turn to Dr. Tam, and she can speak a little bit about the conversations with her colleagues.
Yes, thank you for the question. And absolutely, every jurisdiction, provinces, of course, are delivering the vaccines for the most part. And they have been recruiting many different types of health professionals and others to support their bigger vaccine rollouts. And it depends on where you are. Some provinces, and indeed at the municipal level, are partnering with paramedics. Many are partnering with pharmacists. Many have changed their regulations so that a broader group of people can administer vaccines. And so the Public Health Agency provides training and facilitate the webinars and other training needed for those health professionals to get the information that they need. But the regulatory piece is within the provinces and territories. To date, my colleagues and I think Major General Fortin has been liaising with the implementation teams on the ground, and human resource overall does not seem to be the challenge. Many people are volunteering, so they're getting their ducks in a row for the escalation. As Minister Hajdu said, that for some of the vaccines that are easier to handle, influenza-like clinics and more traditional vaccination clinics will be leveraged. While I have the mic, apparently I made a small mistake, misspoke in my statement, and where I said that the current case counts are still elevated, and it should be almost 75% higher than the peak of the first wave. I think I might have said 75 times instead of 75%. Of course, that does make a difference to the numbers. And thank you for the opportunity to put that on the table, as it were.
Thank you, Dr. Tam.
And I might just step in. Could I just step in to clarify my response to Hélène for the benefit of everybody else in terms of Q2 deliveries?
Of course, Minister.
So, Hélène, I think you were asking about the 10.8 figure, and I was giving a higher number of 23 million combined. The 10.8 figure that you're referring to is Pfizer alone in Q2. Okay, so Pfizer alone in Q2 is 10.8. Moderna in Q2 is 12.2 million. And we're adding to that serum 1.5 million doses in Q2. And COVAX is 1.9 million doses. So I just wanted to clarify that for you and for the room as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for this clarification. We'll take one more question before ending this presser.
This is a question for Minister Dominique Leblanc. I would like to hear an answer in French, please, with respect to the Conservative Party asking that mandatory quarantine be cancelled because of stories of sexual assault in these hotels. What are you doing concretely to better protect travelers staying in these hotels? Are you going to change anything to better protect them? Answer, I think, as Minister Hajdu said, we take allegations of this kind very, very seriously. It's completely unacceptable, of course, that people who find themselves in these hotels be subject to such threats or any discomfort. So we are reviewing and updating our measures to ensure everyone's safety. But as we've been saying for the last few days, Conservatives should not be promoting the idea of limiting essential quarantine measures that are in place to protect Canadians' health and safety. And we are going to take measures to ensure that these sites are appropriate and secure and adequate. But mandatory quarantine is essential to protect Canadians against public health threats, and we will continue to implement any public health measures necessary to protect Canadians. We heard a lot of discussion of the new variants in the last few days and weeks, and that is why we have applied these new necessary public health measures. Thank you, Minister Leblanc.
This is what ends today. Very long press.
Thank you. The conference is now ended. Please disconnect your lines at this time. We thank
And we are going to go to the CBC's David Cochran, who has been listening in with me. David, let's obviously talk about what we have learned about AstraZeneca, what they've been saying about this new vaccine approved by Health Canada, when we're going to start getting shipments.
Yeah, so this is, it's good news when a new vaccine comes into the supply chain, and AstraZeneca has been approved, as has the sort of maybe the generic brand of the AstraZeneca vaccine that's being made by the Serum Institute in India under the brand name COVID Shield. It's sort of like ibuprofen and Advil, right? They're the same thing, they're just made in different places and under different names. I was trying to figure that out. We were trying to
wrap my head around it. It is the same thing. It's just one's a brand and the other is the generic, I guess, right?
Yeah, and Dr. Sharma, Supriya Sharma from Health Canada earlier sort of compared it to the same meal being cooked in different kitchens, slightly different ways, but it's all the same dish. And here you go, and it should have the same effectiveness. So here it is, it's AstraZeneca, it has been approved. We've been anticipating this for several weeks now, but there's been some complexity around its clinical trials, its effectiveness in older populations, and just what specific things to put in the monograph, which is the instructions to give the health professionals, the regulator does, on how to apply it and who to apply it to. And that took some going back and forth, but now Canada has moved to approve this. There should be an initial shipment from the Serum Institute in India of about 500,000 doses sometimes in the next few weeks, and then an additional 1.5 million doses from India coming sometime in May. So that is 2 million doses of the Indian version of the AstraZeneca vaccine we were not anticipating, we are now getting. So that's an acceleration of the vaccine supply and delivery. You're now looking at an April to June period, Andrew. We're going to get about 6.5 million doses total by the end of March. You're looking at April to June, you're going to get about 1.9 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine through our participation in COVAX, which is controversial, but it's 1.9 million doses. 1.5 million doses from India, a combined 23 million Pfizer and Moderna doses, and an undisclosed amount of AstraZeneca doses from our commercial arrangement with AstraZeneca that will come from facilities in the United States. So this trickle of vaccines we've dealt with throughout the winter, those taps are going to open up quite a bit in the April 1 to Canada Day sort of period. And the spring in Canada is always much better than the winter, but particularly so in 2021, as millions of Canadians, tens of millions of Canadians, should be able to get their vaccination process started, if not completed, which is something we have all been waiting on.